the record that changed everything was not a battle report. It was a shipping manifest. Specifically, it was Manifest 7 Theta Crimson, filed by a human commercial freighter called the Ardent Meridian Asterisk, dated 11 standard cycles after the Keth sovereignty had sealed the last functioning star gate in what they officially designated the human containment perimeter. The manifest listed its cargo as agricultural equipment. Its listed route was marked Void Transit, a classification that did not exist in any Keth navigational registry, any Galactic Trade Authority database, or any known spatial mechanics framework. The Keth logistics officer who reviewed it assumed it was a clerical error. She stamped it approved and moved on. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she had asked one question: where, exactly, does a ship go when it travels through nothing? The blockade had been elegant. The Keth sovereignty prided itself on elegant solutions. For 600 years, they had managed the smaller civilizations of the Orathian cluster the way an experienced engineer manages stress in a structure, not by eliminating pressure, but by controlling where it could travel. Stargates were the arteries of the galaxy. Every species that had ever achieved interstellar trade, diplomacy, or military projection had done so through gate networks. You did not need to conquer a species to contain it. You simply needed to own the infrastructure they depended on. The humans had been a problem for approximately 40 years. Not a dangerous problem. The Keth did not consider them dangerous. They were a problem in the way a persistent vibration is a problem. Irritating, slightly destabilizing to nearby systems, and ultimately manageable. The containment decision came down from Sovereign Architect Velithnar in a 12-page administrative order. Humanity's 3 active Stargate access points would be suspended pending compliance review. The Keth controlled 61 of the 63 functioning star gates in the cluster. The remaining 2 were small, outdated relay gates servicing uninhabited fringe systems. The math was simple. Humans were a species that had achieved interstellar reach in roughly 200 years, extraordinarily fast by most civilizational timelines, but the Keth had seen fast risers before. Speed was not strength. What mattered was infrastructure dependency, and the humans were deeply, completely dependent on Keth gate access for 93% of their interstellar commerce. Suspend the gates, Velithnar had written, and the problem suspends itself. The blockade went into effect on a Tuesday. Humans, apparently, had a word for the day of the week. The Keth had not considered this detail worth noting. They should have. The first thing Commander Yara Vasquez noticed when the gates went dark was silence. Not the dramatic silence of catastrophe, no alarms, no emergency broadcasts, no panicked voices on the command channel. The communication relays still worked. The in-system traffic still moved. The colony ships still ran their scheduled loops between Earth and the 4 inner habitats. The silence was the silence of a held breath. She was standing in the operations center of Meridian Station, a mid-sized logistics hub orbiting at the edge of the solar system's heliosphere, the last major human facility before deep space began in earnest. Around her, 17 people stared at screens that showed the same thing, gate status indicators blinking from green to gray. Not red. Gray. Gray meant asterisk not offline. Gray meant asterisk access suspended. "They didn't break them," said Lieutenant Akaffer, her logistics coordinator, in a voice that was trying to be professional and almost succeeding. "They just locked us out." "Yes," Vasquez said. That's actually worse, isn't it?" She didn't answer him. She was looking at the gray indicators and thinking about something her grandmother had told her once, about growing up in a neighborhood where the only grocery store was 40 kilometers away, and the bus routes kept getting cut. Her grandmother had not starved, but the amount of creative problem-solving required to simply eat had shaped the woman she became in ways that pure abundance never could have. "Get me Dr. Reyes," Vasquez said, "and tell him to bring the void mapping files. Akafor hesitated. The theoretical ones. The ones he thinks I don't know about, yes. 3 mysteries were alive in that room, and none of them were the ones the Keth were watching. Mystery 1. Vasquez had asked for void mapping files before the gates went dark. Before. The request was logged in Meridian Station's administrative record with a timestamp 7 hours prior to the lockout order. Mystery 2. The Ardent Meridian, the freighter whose manifest would eventually surface in a Keth logistics review, had departed Meridian Station 4 days after the blockade began. Its destination field was listed as Waypoint OSIRION. No such waypoint existed in any registered navigational chart. Mystery 3. Dr. Emilio Reyes, chief theoretical physicist of the Meridian Station Science Division, and a man who had published exactly 0 papers in the past 3 years, arrived in Vasquez's office carrying a battered physical notebook rather than a data tablet. And the first thing he said when he walked in was not a greeting. He said, "How long did they give us?" Vasquez looked at him. They didn't specify a timeline. No, Reyes said, they wouldn't. That's part of the pressure. The uncertainty is the weapon. He sat down heavily, the notebook landing on the desk between them with a sound that seemed too loud. Good thing we didn't wait for them to tell us. He opened the notebook. The first page was covered in handwritten equations so dense they looked less like mathematics and more like a language. You should know, he said, that what I'm about to propose should be impossible. Should be, Vasquez said. Definitely should be, he looked up. I think we can navigate through the void directly. No gates, no established corridors, no relay infrastructure, just through. The room felt smaller suddenly. The Keth think that without gates, we can't move, Vasquez said slowly. Right. Because every species that's ever tried unguided void transit has either disappeared or come back wrong. Also right. And you're saying... Saying, Reyes interrupted, and his voice carried a quality she could not immediately name, not confidence, not recklessness, something older than both, that every species that tried it was trying to go asterisk around the void. I want to go asterisk through asterisk it. There's a difference, a significant one. He tapped the notebook. The void isn't empty, Vasquez, it's full. It's full of something the Keth have been misreading for centuries because they had no reason to look harder. They had gates. She stared at him. We don't have gates, she said. No, we don't. A pause. Turns out that's an advantage. In the Keth Sovereignty's central administrative hub on Velith Station, a junior analyst named Sarath V was processing routine surveillance data from the human containment perimeter when something made her pause. Human shipping activity had not decreased after the blockade. She checked her instruments, she recalibrated, she ran the numbers again. Human in-system shipping was up 40%. Internal communication traffic was up 260%. Energy consumption at the outer heliosphere station, Meridian, the humans called it, had increased by a factor of 11 over the past 3 weeks. She wrote a report flagging this as potentially significant and submitted it to her supervisor. Her supervisor looked at it for approximately 30 seconds before marking it assessed. Surge activity consistent with panic response and filing it away. The Keth had seen this pattern before. When a contained species lost access to external trade, they always turned inward first, frantic internal reorganization, resource hoarding, communication spikes as they argued about what to do. It always looked dramatic. It always resolved into submission. They're panicking, her supervisor told her. This is exactly what we expected. Sarath V almost agreed. She had almost agreed with a lot of things in her career that she later came to regret. But something about the energy consumption numbers at Meridian Station refused to settle comfortably in her mind. Panic did not require that much power. Panic was not the sort of emotion that demanded a factor 11 increase in energy draw at a deep space logistics hub. Panic looked inward, Whatever Meridian Station was doing, it was pointed outward. The first void transit test killed the probe. Not destroyed, the word Ray's used carefully, was asterisk consumed. The probe entered the void corridor, and its telemetry continued for exactly 47 seconds before the signal stopped. Not cut off, not degraded, stopped cleanly as if something had made a decision. The void responded, Reyes said, and he did not sound frightened. He sounded fascinated, which Vasquez found considerably more unsettling. Responded how? It closed around the probe, like, he searched for words, like a body recognizing a foreign object, rejection response. He was already writing. The corridor geometry is wrong. We're trying to impose a straight line on something that doesn't have straight lines. What does it have? He was quiet for a moment. In the silence, Vasquez could hear the distant hum of the station's power systems, that constant 11 times normal energy draw, feeding Reyes' equipment, feeding the void mapping arrays, feeding something that had no right to exist yet. Curves, he finally said. The void has curves. Everything in it has curves. If you try to move through it in a straight line, it treats you as an error and corrects you. He looked up. We need to curve with it. How do you curve with nothing? You don't curve with nothing. You curve with what's actually there. He turned the notebook toward her. On the page was a diagram that looked, for a disorienting moment, like a map of a river system, branching, flowing, recursive. The void isn't nothing. The Keth call it nothing because they built around it, above it, through gates that bypass it entirely. They never had to understand it. His finger traced one of the branching lines. These are what I've started calling null streams. Flows of I don't have a good word yet. Not energy, not matter, something older than both. They move. They have consistent direction. They have depth. And if we move with them, instead of against them, he said, then theoretically the void doesn't correct us. It carries us. Vasquez looked at the diagram for a long time. How many probes do we have left? 11. How many do you need to map a viable corridor? Reyes was quiet again. That quality in his voice she hadn't been able to name earlier. She recognized it now. It was the voice of a man who had already accepted something painful and was waiting for the person across from him to catch up. Probably 9, he said. Maybe all 11. The mapping process isn't clean. Each probe we lose tells us something about the geometry, but we lose the probe. Yes. She nodded once. Start with 3. Show me what the failures teach us. They lost the next 3 probes in 47, 31, and 18 seconds respectively. The decreasing survival time should have been discouraging. Reyes walked out of the data review session looking like a man who had just won something. It's learning, Akafor said from the doorway, watching him. He said it quietly, the way you say something you're not sure you want to have heard. He's learning, Vasquez corrected. The void isn't learning, Reyes is. Is there a difference? She thought about that longer than she expected to. I don't know, she said finally. Ask me again in 6 months. On Velith Station, Sereth V's second report, flagging a 14% reduction in human agricultural imports from allied non-Keth systems, which should not have been logistically possible given the blockade, was also filed away. Her supervisor told her she was performing well and perhaps overanalyzing normal containment fluctuations. She thanked him and began, very quietly, keeping her own records. 7 probes gone, 4 remaining, 412 days since the blockade began. The *Ardent Meridian departed Meridian Station carrying, officially, agricultural equipment. Vasquez stood at the observation port and watched it go, a battered mid-range freighter with a hull that had been modified so extensively in the past 14 months that it was essentially a different ship wearing the same registration numbers. The modifications were not visible from the outside. That was deliberate. Captain Dario knows the abort parameters, Akafor said beside her. He knows them, she agreed. He won't use them. You don't know that. She turned to look at him. Marcus Ockhaffer was 34 years old, meticulous, deeply competent, and had developed a habit in the past year of saying things that were technically true but missed the point. She had stopped being frustrated by it. She had come to understand it as the sound of a person in the process of learning something. I know Dario, she said. He has a daughter on Kepler habitat. She's 3 years old. She's never seen a star gate. She's grown up in a world where the outside doesn't come in. A pause. Dario isn't going to abort. Ockhaffer was quiet. That's the part I keep not accounting for, he said finally. Most people don't. The asterisk ardent meridian disappeared into the black, and for 37 hours, its transponder sent nothing. Then a signal, clean, stable, from a position 11 light-years beyond the solar system's heliosphere in the deep void between star systems, a region that should have been completely unreachable without gate infrastructure. The signal was a single audio clip. Captain Dario's voice, calm as a man reading a weather report, void transit complete, waypoint Osirian established, cargo intact, hull integrity holding, request permission to attempt return route. In the operations center, someone started crying. Vasquez did not look to see who. She was already composing the return authorization. She was also composing, in the back of her mind, the answer to the question Ockhaffer had almost asked, and then stopped himself from asking. What does waypoint Osirian actually connect to? Not an answer, a question, a larger question than the one they'd started with. Because the asterisk ardent meridian had not simply punched through empty space. The null stream it had ridden had deposited it at a very specific location. A location that Ray's void maps suggested was not random. A location that appeared in the raw data to intersect with asterisk something, a gravitational signature, a recurring pattern in the null stream flows, something that did not match any registered astronomical body. Something that had, apparently, been there for a very long time. Something the Keth maps didn't show. This is where the story changed shape. Until this moment, it had been a story about survival, a species locked out of the infrastructure it needed, improvising desperately to stay connected to the larger galaxy. That was the story everyone watching understood, the story the Keth understood, the story even Vasquez had believed she was living. That story was true. It was also a surface. Ray's came to her office at 300 station time, which was unusual. He sat down without being invited, which was more unusual. He put his notebook on the desk and opened it to a page near the middle, and what Vasquez saw made her stop breathing for a moment. The diagram on the page was the void map, the null stream network they had been carefully charting through 7 dead probes and 1 successful transit. But Ray's had added something. He'd overlaid it with a second map, drawn in a different color, in lines that were older and more worn than the fresh equations around them. It was a Keth Stargate map. Tell me what you see, Ray said. She looked for a long time. The star gates, 63 of them, spread across the Orathian cluster like a web, sat at the intersections. Every single gate sat at a point where multiple null streams converged. Every single one. They built the gates on top of the null streams, she said slowly. Not on top of. Ray's voice was very controlled. Over. They built infrastructure to bypass the null streams entirely, to skip across the surface of the void using the streams as structural anchors while never, ever going into them. He paused. The null streams are load-bearing. The gates depend on them, but the Keth don't know what's actually underneath their own infrastructure. She understood, and then she understood more, and then she understood something that made her feel briefly cold. The void route we're building, she said, runs through the foundation of their entire gate network, Ray said. Yes, we're not finding an alternative, we're finding the original, the thing that was there before the gates, The thing the gates were built to avoid because he hesitated. Because accessing null streams directly is not safe. We know this. Every probe confirmed it, but humans can handle not safe. We've been handling not safe since we came down from the trees, Vasquez said. I was going to say since the gates locked us out, but yes, also that. The silence stretched between them. Rays, she said. If the null stream network runs under the entire Keth gate infrastructure, then every answer we find about navigating it is also, incidentally, a map of everything they built. He closed the notebook. I know. Does anyone else know? He shook his head. Not yet. I thought you should. I thought there should be a conversation about what we do with. We finished building the route, she said immediately. He blinked. That's it. That's the whole conversation. We finish building our route. We connect our people. We do what we came here to do. She met his eyes. What we do with the rest of it, that's a conversation for after we're not starving. He nodded slowly, started to stand, stopped. Vasquez, the gravitational signature at waypoint Osirian. What about it? I've been cross-referencing it with historical Keth astronomical surveys. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. The Keth have a notation for it, in surveys going back 400 years. What notation? Anomaly class unresolved, do not approach. The cold feeling came back. They know something is there, Vasquez said. They know something is there. They just don't know what. And they built a gate 3 light years away from it and deliberately routed all traffic in the other direction. He picked up his notebook. I'm going to need probe number 11. Probe 11 returned. This was unexpected. Probes sent toward the Osirian anomaly were expected to behave like the test probes, consumed, corrected, rejected. Probe 11 came back after 6 hours with 17 terabytes of data and a hull that had been physically altered. Not damaged, altered. The material composition of its outer shell had changed in ways that were consistent with extreme age, as if the probe had been somewhere where time moved differently and had come back carrying evidence of it. The data was dense, recursive, and largely beyond immediate interpretation, but certain patterns emerged quickly. The anomaly at waypoint Osirian was a structure. Not natural, constructed, ancient beyond reliable dating. The dating instrument simply returned errors, which was itself a data point. The structure was enormous, and it was built around a null stream convergence of a scale that made the Keth gate network look like a garden hose attached to an ocean. And it was intact. Someone built a void transit hub, Reyes said, his voice strange. Before the Keth, before any of the species in the current cluster registry, before I don't have a before for this. There might not be a before. He looked at Vasquez. And the Keth know it exists and have been steering around it for 400 years. Why? Akefer said from the doorway. It was a good question. It was the question that would take another 216 days to answer, and the answer would be worse than any of them expected. Sarath V's 7th report was not filed away. It landed on the desk of Velithnar herself, flagged by an automated system that Sarath V had never known existed. A pattern recognition algorithm that watched for analyst reports being consistently suppressed from a single data stream. The algorithm was designed to prevent institutional blindness. It had been installed 40 years ago after the Keth badly misread the expansion behavior of the Dulhari species and suffered consequences that the official record described as significant diplomatic costs and the unofficial record described as 3 destroyed stations and a decade of territorial retreat. Velithnar read Sarath V's 7 reports in sequence. She read them twice. Then she summoned her chief military advisor, a craggy veteran named Dasketh who had served through 4 containment operations and believed in the fundamental logic of infrastructure control with the certainty of someone who had watched it work. The humans have not reduced activity since the lockout, Velithnar said. Confirmed, Keth said. We believe this is internal reorganization consistent with. They've increased it, specifically at Meridian Station, which is a deep space logistics hub with no logical reason to increase power consumption by a factor of 11. She set the reports down. And a ship departed from Meridian Station 11 days ago, listed cargo as agricultural equipment, listed destination as a navigational waypoint that does not exist, and reappeared 11 light-years away in deep void. Keth was quiet. That's not possible, he said. The telemetry says it happened. Telemetry can be spoofed. Then explain the gravitational wake data from our monitoring buoys in that sector. She slid a secondary report across the desk. A ship transited through deep void, without a gate. The buoys logged the mass displacement. He looked at the data. He looked at it for a long time. They're claiming they can navigate void space directly, he said finally. No, they're not claiming anything. They just did it. She stood, moving to the viewport that looked out over Velith Station's central ring. What does it mean, Keth, if the humans can transit void space without gates? He thought about it. Vasquez would have recognized the pause, the specific quality of silence that surrounds a person catching up to something they should have already understood. It means the blockade doesn't contain them, he said slowly. It means more than that, she turned. If they can navigate the null streams, and they apparently can, then they can go anywhere, not just around our gates, anywhere in the cluster, on pathways we cannot monitor, cannot intercept, cannot block. Because we built our entire monitoring infrastructure on gate transit. We have no sensors in deep void. We have nothing there. A pause. We have nothing there because we believed nothing could be there. We should have, Keth started. We should have asked harder questions 40 years ago, she said. We didn't. We were comfortable. She looked back at the viewport. Send a contact delegation to Meridian Station, non-military configuration. I want to talk to whoever is running that operation. You want to negotiate. I want to understand, she said. Those are different things, a beat. Also, I want to know what they found at Assyrian because they went there deliberately, which means they know. The Keth delegation arrived at Meridian Station in a vessel that was very deliberately not a warship, which Vasquez appreciated even as she cataloged the sensor arrays. It was almost certainly carrying anyway. She met them in the station's main conference room, a functional space that had been converted from a cargo bay 14 months ago when the blockade began, and the station's population had nearly doubled as people arrived to work on the Void Transit project. The walls still had the mounting brackets for cargo shelving. She had not removed them. It felt important not to remove them. The Keth envoy's name was Sarathvi. Vasquez had not expected it to be the analyst who had written the 7 reports. She had read them. Intercepted Keth communications were among the many things Meridian Station had become very good at, and she had built a specific mental image of their author. The young woman who sat down across from her matched that image in some ways and violated it in others. She was younger than expected. She seemed, underneath the formal diplomatic exterior, like someone who was genuinely curious rather than genuinely afraid. That was rarer than it should have been. Commander Vasquez, Sarathvi said, I've been authorized to discuss terms for a partial restoration of gate access pending. You found the transit data on the Asterisk Ardent Meridian, Vasquez said. A pause, yes. And you know about Assyrian. Longer pause. We know something is there. We've known for 400 years. Why haven't you investigated it? The silence that followed this question had a different quality than the previous ones. It was not the silence of evasion. It was the silence of something that was difficult to say. Because we didn't know what it would do if we disturbed it, Sarathvi said finally. Our surveys from a safe distance suggested it was dormant. Our models suggested that introducing active null stream navigation in its proximity could. The word our scientists used was *awaken. We decided it was safer to route around it, to leave it alone, to build infrastructure that didn't touch it. She looked at Vasquez directly. And then you drove a probe directly into it. The probe came back, Vasquez said. I know. It came back changed. I know that too. She leaned forward slightly. What did the data show? Vasquez considered this. The information control problem she had been carrying for 200 days, what to share, when, with whom, pressed against the moment. She looked at Sarath V's face and saw, underneath the diplomatic formality, the same expression she saw on Ray's when he opened his notebook. Someone who needed to know, not for power, but because not knowing was genuinely unbearable. She made a decision. It showed a transit hub, Vasquez said. Pre-Keth, pre-cluster history as currently recorded, built around a null stream convergence of a size that your entire gate network is. I don't want to be insulting, but it's a fraction. Your whole gate network is a fraction of what someone built there, a very long time ago. Sarath V absorbed this with visible effort. Who built it, she asked. We don't know yet. Can it be accessed? We don't know yet. Vasquez paused. We were working on that when your delegation arrived. The youngest diplomatic envoy the Keth sovereignty had sent in 40 years of human contact looked at her for a long moment. You're going to go in, she said. It wasn't a question. We were planning to, yes. Without knowing what's in there. Without knowing what's in there. Sarath V seemed to be working through something. Commander, our models suggest that activating that structure, if it can be activated, would fundamentally restructure null stream flows across the entire cluster. Every gate anchor in the Keth network would be affected. We could be talking about. I know, Vasquez said. You know. Ray's knows. I know. We've discussed it. She kept her voice even. Your gates are anchored to null streams that run under a structure that's been dormant for longer than your species has had written language. If we go in and the structure activates, our entire gate network could destabilize, Sarath V said, catastrophically. Yes. And you're still going to do it. Vasquez looked at her. Sarath V, you locked us out of every gate in the cluster and expected us to sit quietly and wait for you to decide when we were acceptable enough for access. We have 400,000 people in outer habitat stations who haven't received a supply shipment in over a year. We have 3 colony ships that were mid-transit when the blockade started and have been running holding patterns on emergency fuel reserves since then. We have, her voice did not crack, but it changed slightly, the way something changes when a great deal of pressure is suddenly visible. We have children who have never seen another star. So yes, we are going to go in. We are going to find out what that structure is and what it does and whether it can help us connect to the galaxy that your sovereignty decided to lock us out of. And if the null stream activation affects your gate network, a pause. Then you should have thought about that before you built your infrastructure over something you didn't understand and then used it as a cage. The silence was complete. Sarath V sat with it for a long time. Then she said very quietly, how can we help? They went in together. 2 human ships and 1 Keth science vessel, the most improbable convoy in cluster history, navigating a null stream corridor that Ray's had mapped with 11 probes and an understanding of void geometry that no species was supposed to have. Akafor piloted the lead ship. He had stopped saying technically true things that missed the point somewhere around day 300 and started saying less in general but meaning more of it. The void around them was not dark. That was the first thing. Null stream space was lit from within, not brightly, not in any way that suggested warmth, but with a cold structural luminescence that made the ship's viewports look like windows into the bottom of an ocean. The streams moved around them, visible now, curves of something that was definitely not light but performed some of the same functions. They followed the geometry. The void didn't correct them. We're fish, Ray's said from the seat beside Vasquez, looking at the streams. We spent 11 probes learning to be fish in a river instead of trying to build a bridge across it." "Is that good?" HFY asked. "It's accurate." The structure emerged from the deep void the way mountains emerge from fog, gradually, incomprehensibly large, with the specific quality of things that have been where they are for so long that the space around them has adjusted to their presence. It was not dramatic in the way Vasquez had expected. It was simply there, the way fundamental things are there: gravity, time, the stubborn persistence of matter. It was also unmistakably waiting. She knew it was waiting the way she knew certain things that she could not rationally justify. The way her grandmother had known, apparently, that a bus route that wasn't running today would not be running tomorrow either, and had started planning around that fact before the cancellation was official. "Rays," she said. "Already on it." The probe data had given them a map of the structure's exterior. It had given them nothing about the interior except one data point. The probe had entered at a specific point, not random, not an accident of trajectory, but what appeared to be a designated access point, because the material composition of the hull at that location had been changed in a way that was consistent with asterisk being read. Scanned, the structure had scanned the probe and then, apparently, changed it in some way. It wanted to know what we were, Reyes had theorized. And when it figured out we weren't what it expected because we're nothing like whoever built it, it kept the probe anyway, studied it, sent it back. "Sent it back to us," Vasquez had said. "Why?" "I think," he said carefully, "because whatever intelligence designed this place wanted a response, wanted to know if whoever sent the probe would come themselves." A pause. "It's a test, possibly the test, the intelligence check. Do you understand enough to come?" They came. The access point recognized the lead ship the same way it had recognized the probe. There was a moment of stillness, a pause in the null stream flows that felt, on every vessel in the convoy, like being held, just briefly, in something enormous and attentive. Then the structure opened. Inside, a space beyond rational architecture. A hub, not a metaphorical hub. A literal navigational nexus, every null stream in the cluster running through it the way rivers run to the sea, every stream mapped and organized, and alive was the wrong word. Arranged. Arranged by a mind that had been arranging for longer than recorded history, and had been waiting, dormant, for someone to arrive who was desperate enough, and stubborn enough, and specific enough in the particular human way of being stubborn and specific, to navigate through the void rather than across it. The Keth science vessel broadcast 14 minutes of pure data, readings that Sarath V's team would spend the next decade interpreting and still not fully exhaust. Reyes recorded everything. HFY in the pilot's seat said nothing for a very long time. Then, so when Dario flew out here with agricultural equipment. "He didn't know this was here," Vasquez said. "Nobody did. But we came anyway." "Yes. Because we had to. Because we had no other option." HFY turned in his seat to look at her. His face had an expression she did not immediately recognize, and then did the expression of someone who has watched a familiar thing reveal an unfamiliar depth. "That's the part they never account for," he said, "having no other option." The activation of the Osirian hub did not destroy the Keth Gate network. It changed it. The null streams, now flowing through a properly functioning nexus for the first time in whatever geological epoch had passed since the structure went dormant, redistributed. They found new paths. They deepened. 14 Keth gates in the outer cluster flickered offline for 72 hours, then re-established, not in their original configuration but in a new one. More stable, more efficient, connected to pathways that had never been accessible before. 3 gate positions that the Keth had permanently marked as non-functional for technical reasons that no one had fully understood came back online. The Keth engineers examining the change spent weeks arguing about what had happened, and their conclusions kept colliding with one another, and with the fundamental assumption that had underlain their entire infrastructure philosophy for 600 years. That void space was empty, inert, and navigable only at its edges. It wasn't, it had never been. They had simply never had a reason to look harder. Velith Nar reinstated human gate access within the month. She did not characterize it as a policy reversal in her official statement. She characterized it as an updated assessment of navigational infrastructure in the Orathian cluster based on new data. Most political languages have a word for this kind of description. In the human diplomatic archives, the word used was capitulation. In the private notes that Velith Nar kept, she used a different word. The word was education. Sarath V was promoted. The junior analyst who had written 7 reports that her supervisor filed away became the first Keth ambassador to the human station in the cluster's outer zone, a position that had not existed before, because the Keth had not previously believed the outer zone warranted an embassy. They had believed it warranted a containment protocol. Captain Dario returned to the solar system on a route that passed through 2 newly accessible null stream corridors that the Assyrian hub had opened, arriving 3 weeks earlier than the best gate transit time would have allowed. His daughter was 3 years and 8 months old when he left. She was 4 years and 2 months old when he walked back through Meridian Station's main airlock. She had, apparently, been practicing something to say when he got back. She looked up at him and said, "Daddy, where did you go?" He looked down at her, and the answer he gave was not a short one. The full impact of the Assyrian discovery took years to become clear. Most of what it changed was structural, navigational access, trade route reorganization, the quiet political realignment of a cluster adjusting to the fact that the species it had contained had found the foundation of the infrastructure that was supposed to contain them, and in the process of desperately trying to survive, had turned the lights back on. But the thing that lasted, the thing that Sarath V wrote about in her eventual memoir, the thing that Dasketh referenced in his testimony to the Sovereignty's Administrative Council, the thing that Reyes spent the remainder of his career trying to formally articulate without quite managing it, was something smaller. Not the hub, not the null stream rerouting, not the 300% expansion of accessible void corridors that transformed cluster trade over the following decade. It was this. The void had been there for the entire history of space-faring civilization in the Orathian cluster. Every species that had developed, matured, built gate networks and trade empires and containment protocols had looked at the void and seen an obstacle, a wall, a thing to be managed, bypassed, avoided. The humans had looked at the void and seen a problem that needed solving because they had no other choice, and had discovered, in the specific pressure of having no other choice, that the wall had always been a door. The Keth had built around it because they could afford to. They had always had enough options, enough infrastructure, enough control, that the void's actual nature was a question they never needed to ask. Humanity had been given a single, enormous, non-negotiable reason to ask. They had been locked out. Sarath V's memoir ended with a line that was, for many years, considered controversial in Keth academic circles and obvious everywhere else. We closed the gates to stop them from moving. What we actually did was teach them that gates are optional. Vasquez was standing at the same observation port where she had watched the *Ardent Meridian * depart, 491 days after the blockade began. The port now looked out over a station that had tripled in size, bristling with null stream mapping arrays that had no equivalent anywhere in the cluster, staffed by people who had learned, through the specific curriculum of desperation, to navigate the thing every other civilization called nothing. Reyes came to stand beside her. He had a new notebook. The old one was in the station archive, under a classification level that Vasquez had personally established and that Reyes had not complained about. The consortium is requesting access to the mapping data, he said. The Dulhari, too. 4 other systems have made inquiries. I know. The Void network is larger than we mapped. There are stream channels going outward beyond the cluster, substantially beyond. A pause. Someone built things out there too, a lot of things. The cold feeling was back. She had come to understand it not as fear, exactly, but as the sensation of standing at the edge of something whose depth you cannot see. How far out, she asked. I don't have a number yet that I trust. He was quiet for a moment. The species that built Osirian didn't build just one hub. She looked at the stars. They had always been there. They had always been close, in the null stream sense, closer than any gate distance suggested, connected by flows that ran beneath the galaxy's visible infrastructure like roots beneath pavement. A galaxy full of doors. All of them locked. Until a species with no other option learned to ask what a lock actually meant. Raise, she said. Yeah. Get probe 12 ready.